and you built that functionality in. An agent didn't figure that out on its own in sort of meta way.
So I think so the goal is what is the simplest thing I can build that can build itself?
Welcome, AI Tinkerers. You're here at One Shot. This is our virtual forum, our global stage with top AI contributors and leaders from our network. The first time that collectively we all started like getting into agents was thanks to Yohei and Baby AGI about a year and a half ago. Yohei's here with us today to talk about AGI, or Baby AGI 2.
Thank you for having me. I think I was at the first AI Tinkers dinner that you did. So it's been it's nice to nice to be back for this. And then I did the one at AI2 as well. So
yes,
I consider myself an AI tinker. So it's good to be here.
You are definitely an AI tinker to such an extent that your log of projects is dense. Tell us what Baby AGI 2 is and maybe show us.
I will.
Yeah.
So Baby AGI was very simple task planning, essentially looping through LLMs. I think I did about 6 or 7 iterations from the original Baby AGI. And I had names like Baby B AGI, Cat AGI, DEF, Elf, and Fox. So
maybe start there. You want to pull up Baby Deer, the demo, the Vercel thing. It's
the Baby AGI UI. That's a great demo.
It's very polished, actually.
It is.
I mean, here we are a year and a half later. There's tons of agentic RAG systems that any number of people have built.
Yep.
And I was pretty impressed at how well it worked. First of all, the results were great, but also just the user experience. Like, do a like research query. Like,
I'll do we'll look up Baby AGI 2. How about that?
Okay, sure.
We'll see if it works.
So, okay, while it's doing this, the first instantiation of Baby AGI was, hey, use your reasoning to think of a task list or a plan to get to a goal.
Yep.
Specify the goal. The human gives us goals.
Yep.
AI figures out how to do that and does it, and it sort of self-corrects a little bit as it goes.
Yep.
And it pulls from known tools that you've told it knows or that it commonly knows. Okay.
Like I had to build each tool.
Yeah. Right.
And so I think Baby Elf or Baby Fox was when I started playing around with the idea of Baby AGI building tools for itself.
Okay.
And it didn't work that well. Like I got it to do some rough stuff, but there was just so much I wanted to do around leveraging existing context that was hard.
Okay.
And then like if you think about artifacts as like one-time code that you write and throw away, Canvas is a little bit more, which is let's write code and fix it until it's good.
Yep.
But then let's throw it away.
Right.
You're not going to reuse it.
What's Replit Agent then?
I think Replit Agent is probably getting to the point where like it's a tool that you can reuse once it's built.
Because it's going to build a lot of components and put them somewhere that you're going to try to rely on after.
Which is great. And I already...
But it's a one-shot, like I build the thing and I'm done?
You can iterate a little bit on Replit Agent. You can talk it after it's built.
But are you sort of iterating on the build phase and then you're like done? Or is it's not an evolving system like...
It doesn't really feel like an evolving system. I feel like with Replit Agent, it's similar to what I've been getting out of using ChatGPT and AI, which is you're going to end up with 100 different projects.
And what they've done is they tied it to the deployment stuff that they've got. So
which is great.
Way more convenient.
Yeah, and that's why I build everything on Replit.
Right.
But I mean, I'm at a point where I want one system where I can build all of my tools into because I can't manage 100 different tools. I want one tool that has all of it.
Okay, so part of it's just like the idea of a new kind of code repository for these agent-built tools.
Yeah, like if I'm building a new tool and I built a single function in a previous tool that could be useful, I want to leverage that.
Yeah.
And I want my AI to automatically leverage that.
And that's different from just having a mono repo in what way? A, it's more dynamic. B, it's like, why not abstract away from building?
So I did actually start with the mono repo. In the first 6 months of the year, I was doing the same thing, but with a slightly different approach, which was a gigantic mono repo. I had a skills folder, and any function that was placed in the skills folder was automatically a skill that could be loaded. Yeah. One of the challenges I ran into was that as I added more and more skills, I was asking the LLM to decide the directory structure, which wasn't the most obvious because do you bucket AI tools? Do you bucket plugins separately?
Humans struggle with that too.
Like what's the right directory structure? And then I felt like there were just so much inefficiencies on actually, like if I wanted to embed each function and store it, I had to have a separate embedding database and then map that embedding database to the functions in the mono repo where the ID was the directory location and the function name. And it was just very clunky.
Yeah. Okay. And so, all right, we'll get the Baby AGI too, but what did we just find here in the
Okay,
one?
so it generated a task list to search for information about Baby AGI 2, which it did. It summarized information, and then I guess
Cool.
it provided a detailed exploration, which
It's kind of like augmented RAG. There's a ton of these. You said you were experimenting with tools. What other tools did you have in Baby AGI?
So I started with having I mean, this is like way back, so it's going to sound the most like really obvious to people who've been building agents recently. But the first tool was like a web search agent, a web scrape agent, and then an LLM tool were the three agents. I think after I did that, one of the things I realized was that anytime I do a web search, I'm always going to do a web scrape afterwards.
Yeah.
And having an LLM make that decision actually didn't make sense. So I started making more complex tools.
Because you're trying to find information, you just search, and then you want to actually extract.
Like if I do a web search, I'm going to web scrape the pages. That's always a flow. So actually, the tools became more complex. So like a web search tool became a search and scrape tool. And so I started iterating on that. And then once I had that, I did eventually start building in tools to read its own files, like read its own directory structure, read the code, and then eventually write code.
Okay, so agents started kind of the whole general discourse, I think, started with Baby AGI. Really, it probably spawned a ton of startups that we talk about. I have spent some time looking at some of the emerging popular frameworks. I would say, so Lang Graph, Harrison says, I get asked all the time. Here's my definition. An agent is a system that uses an LLM to decide the control flow of an application. Autogen, an entity that can act on behalf of human intent, that can send messages, receive messages, respond to other agents, take actions, and interact with other agents. So there's a multi-agent thing coming into it. Crew AI are basically agents are conceptualized as literal members of a team, which I love. You define their role, you give them context, you give them tools, and then you sort of say, yeah, let them talk to each other and figure it out. Vertex Studio goes to like almost a chat orientation, at least for now. And it's very similar to Crew AI. You're defining roles. It's very approachable. And you're letting them interact and figure out their how to delegate subtasks and make playbooks or flows, as they call them. Multion is, so for them, an agent is an assistant that can autonomously perform tasks on a browser on your behalf. And they built that whole system. None of those, to me, place the central emphasis on tool building. And I'm excited about Baby AGI 2 because the whole evolution of LLMs is like, they're kind of work creators. They shift data around, they make recommendations, they summarize, they create plans, they make your plans better, they augment your intelligence. But I want to get work done. Like, actually click the mouse, actually send the email, actually download the file, actually create a database, actually build and execute code.
Take action, right?
Yes. So your premise of Baby AGI 2, if I'm not mistaken, is a tools building first approach to agents.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes. I mean, Baby AGI, the first one, especially with no tools, all it did was think about what it could do, right? It was just hitting the LLM. And then probably the biggest feedback was like, it doesn't actually do anything. Yeah. Of course, they couldn't do anything.
Sure.
And as I started building actions and tools and started actually trying to use different versions of Baby AGI, I found myself in a situation where I needed to give it a lot of tools. I use a lot of tools, which means my Baby AGI needs a lot.
I have to stop you right there. What's the worst thing that's ever shot yourself in the foot moment that you've had? Have you ever deleted it? Have you had to buy a new computer?
I have not. My security is running everything on Replit. I can always push the stop button.
So you're not actually ever running anything locally?
I don't run anything locally. I always just run everything on Replit. I'm not a good developer. I'm not going to run a loop on my computer when I don't know what I'm doing.
So flip side, how can it do anything useful when it's in a sandbox that doesn't have your context?
Well, everything I do is online, right? So all my tools have APIs.
Okay.
I rarely do anything on my computer. Everything's on Google Drive, email.
All right. You can call destructive APIs. You've never done anything. Or private data.
The funniest thing I did was after I started building tools, I tried giving Baby AGI as a tool. Yeah. And what it did was it just kept recursively asking Baby AGI to do stuff. Okay. So instead of actually trying to do it, it just called Baby AGI again,
What's the largest unexpected bill you've had?
Oh, no, it doesn't get that expensive. I mean, it's probably,
a year and a half ago it could, though.
It could have been, but again, I mean, my bills probably got up to a few $100s a month at most. Okay. But again, no matter how much I ran it, I was the only person using it. Okay. I never let tens of thousands of people run any of my things on this.
A year and a half ago, I knew multiple people who were well over $1,000 of oops.
Yes, I did not do that. And Replit, again, if I did accidentally let a loop run a long time, but Replit just times it out and stops it for me if I walk away from my computer.
Okay. All right, so you got your tools running in the cloud. They're doing non-destructive things. You've tamed them. You haven't spent too much money. Everything's gotten better and faster over the interim. What is the most boring but indispensable tool you've built for your own purpose?
I have a whole bunch of little tools that I think are incredibly helpful.
Like what?
I have a couple AI email addresses. For example, we have a deals at untap.vc, where if a deal comes in, I can forward it. It'll extract all the data and upload my Airtable. Yeah, that's just a Zapier. Yeah, Zapier, if it's an internal email address, filter out the top folder, extract data, update our Airtable.
Okay.
It's just a great way to capture data. I mean,
And that's invoking like Baby AGI or something you wrote?
no, so that one's more just a more simpler one. Yep.
Anything else?
More recently, I've started using Wokello a lot, which is an AI tool for doing industry company research. So we were building our own AI due diligence tool, which I was using all the time.
Yeah.
In the process of building it, probably met half a dozen companies building the same thing. We ultimately invested in Wokello. If I give it an industry or a company name, it'll spit out a 40 page report.
How do you spell it?
Wokelo.
Cool. Good
Wokello.
stuff.
So for me, if I come across a company, if it's I'm a generalist investor, I look at a whole bunch of different industries. If I hear a term I don't know in an industry I'm curious about, my current expectation is I can just ask about it and I'll have a full report in 30 minutes that I can review.
Any tools you've built, especially agentic tools, but doesn't have to be, that you now consider a secret weapon? You're actually not going to tell people about them because they give you an edge. Anything like that?
No, I think I'm pretty open about
You're
it.
very open. I just thought I'd ask because you never know.
Yeah, actually there might be one that I haven't really talked about too much.
What is it? Can you talk about it now?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could. I have a lot of like contact searching tools.
Oh, interesting.
Like if I need to find, if I need to find the email addresses of CTOs at the largest manufacturing companies, like I can, do
you use third-party APIs for some of it?
I do use third-party APIs.
A lot of the, getting to LinkedIn is tough, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, a lot of third-party APIs using tools like I used to have Crunchbase. I've been playing with Harmonic, which is a lot of startup data. I use a tool called Norbert to find email addresses. Okay. So there's a lot of tools like that that are pretty powerful.
Does it ever get it wrong? I mean, it's got to get it wrong.
It does get it wrong. And, I mean, I get stuff wrong all the time.
A nicely worded email from real Yohei that was actually agent to a person that doesn't exist or is the wrong interpretation of who they are. And
so one thing I haven't really automated much is communication.
So you're always in the loop.
I'm always in the loop. When it comes to communicating with people, I haven't automated that yet. At least not using my name. Yeah. Like I've thought about spinning up a mini Yohei internally at our team who might send automated emails, but I would want it to be kind of almost like an obviously AI that's doing it versus me.
When you're doing that to help you draft and then you're sending, have you done things like with fine tuning to help you emulate a certain style? Or?
I played with fine tuning a little bit, but I feel like it's kind of overkill for what I need. I mean, honestly, a few shot prompt on giving some context.
It's easier.
Yeah,
agreed. Okay, cool. Interesting. All right, let's go back to let's go to Baby AGI 2. Let's
do
some tool building.
Let's jump in.
I have some scenarios that probably it can't do.
Oh, it definitely can't do any of the scenarios you're probably thinking about if you're actually thinking about it. So yeah, should we walk through it?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I'll just walk through the dashboard real quick. So you can pip install Baby AGI. This is a fresh one. Then I'm running it. So I can create an app which creates a dashboard. And the dashboard is really for both demo purposes and kind of my personal purpose. And the first thing you'll see is a table of functions. It's pre-populated because yes, there are some default functions that come with the framework.
Enough to get the baby started in life.
Exactly. So the whole framework, the most unique thing, or at least the biggest kind of aha moment for me when I started building this, and I did it in 3 weekends, I think, was to store functions in a database.
Not GitHub, where you have versioning, where you can share, where you can fork.
Okay.
But a database.
There's plenty of reasons to do it in GitHub, but for me, it was the directory structure that I just could not wrap my mind around in terms of well organizing.
Even for eventually having a directory and then to GitHub, why not just put it into database?
Like for me, the database is like a table structure makes sense, and what I'm able to do is also do versioning. So if I update the code, it'll automatically update the version. Very easy to do in a table.
Yeah.
There's descriptions.
Yeah, cool.
I can embed the descriptions. Again, like where do you store an embedding if you're storing all your functions in GitHub?
I love how effectively you're saying, for my developer happiness and productivity, I'm doing it this way, even though it's completely out of the norm.
Yes.
And I think that's liberating. Why not? Everything's changing anyways.
Exactly. Like to me, again, I have no idea where you would store your embeddings. Like again, are you going to map your embeddings to your function? If you stick everything in a table, you can just add columns and have an embeddings table. You can have multiple embeddings columns if you want.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So keep it with
so we have the description, we have embeddings, which I don't show. We have all the input parameters, output parameters. You've seen this a lot if you're storing functions. This helps you write functions.
Yeah.
A big aspect of...
Well, I like that your documentation falls out of this too. And therefore the discoverability of these functions by the agents.
Yes. That's the key, right? Is this is all for the agent. This is what you're seeing is user interface, but like I'm only thinking about Baby AGI's ability to build its own code when I'm building this. One thing I want to do is have, for it to be able to build more and more complex tools, it needs to be able to leverage existing tools it's had. So philosophically, it's microservice inspired. I want functions to use other functions. So this is the dependency column.
Cool.
So a good example might be the description writer. It might use GPT call. And so it can define dependencies, which can be any function in the database can be defined as a dependency.
Is that because the function itself doesn't hard code that link? You're just sort of, is a dependency just a suggestion for something that's going to be dynamically run to potentially use? Or
no, this is kind of hard coded. Like if you want to run description writer, right, it will look for the GPT call function and load that dependent function dynamically into the execution environment so that it's available. Because GPT call is being called from within the description writer.
Okay, cool.
And the same thing happens with imports, which is if you define the imports, it will first check to see if it's installed. If not, it'll install it, and then it'll make that import available in the execution.
And so where you're going for this clearly is if you give it a new goal and it decides I need to go build a tool, it's going to be figuring out the imports and it's going to store them here.
Yes.
And that way it doesn't have to figure it out every single time. It can sort of run in a proven way.
Yes. The idea is that it should, when it defines a function and stores it in the database, I want it to tell me what are the other functions you need, what are all the imports you need, what are all the auth keys you need. And
do you have a notion that it's that this function in the database is tested and works and is robust and performant? Or is that for later?
That's for later. Well, like building a testing tool to make sure that every function that gets added works is a future thing.
I could see that.
But I'm glad you brought that up. I did add a feature called triggers, which is I can define a trigger for a function, which means whenever an X function runs, whatever that's anything that defines that as a trigger will automatically run afterwards. I think one of them is AI description generator. So whenever a function is added or updated, which is kind of a default function I just baked in, that anytime that happens, AI description generator will always look at the description. Then if it's empty, we'll use description writer, which uses GPT call to write a description and add it. Okay,
so if some agent is fulfilling a goal, creates a bunch of new tools and functions, that'll automatically get triggered as a callback side effect and create some documentation for you.
Yeah, it'll just like look at the code and write a description and store it as a description.
You decided to do that and you built that functionality in. An agent didn't figure that out on its own in some meta way.
So I think so the goal is what is the simplest thing I can build that can build itself?
Yeah.
And there's a couple things I think it needed. Yeah. And so most of it is around, so most of the functions here are around,
right, because we know that we know that context matters a lot, and we know that even summarization of things can affect the prompt.
Yes, exactly.
To the better,
So this is the functions table where you can see all the functions, you can see when it was created, the number of times it's run, the last log date, all that.
Cool.
If you click through into a function, every function has a functions page.
Oh, cool.
And based on the input parameter, it auto-generates a form where you can test each function. This is just something I personally wanted as I'm building functions. I want to just be able to test it, so I can say write haiku, and it'll generate it. It'll write a haiku. I see the versions, I see the created date, dependencies. If I refresh, it'll show me the log here. I can actually go in and read and update the code directly here as well.
Okay.
So this is the functions page, and each function has an automatically generated functions page.
Okay. As the underlying models get better, more and more of your Baby AGI will just use this one function for everything.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, right? Yeah. Which is great. And one of the things I want is eventually get to is for it to like try creating multiple functions, testing them, and starting to score which one works best.
Yeah.
Throwing out ones that don't.
I think that's the dream. I think the dream is like I can kind of be like a half-baked spec thing and then sleep. And by morning, the AI not only will have created fully functional versions, but for anything in my spec that was vague or unclear, it'd be like, that's fine.
Yep.
See, computer time's cheap while you're sleeping. So we took your fuzzy spec and we just made the most potentially what we thought you might have meant. Yeah. 5 versions of each of those things.
Yeah, I mean, what I imagine is being able to say, grab me, the name, emails of CTOs of the top, Fortune 100 companies. I wake up in the morning, it says, hey, I tried 5 different ways. Yeah. I found one way that worked really well. Yeah. Next time you ask me, I'll use that one way.
Yeah. I think that competition aspect, you don't have that built in.
No, it's not. That's huge. But that's what I want to get to, right?
And this came out a week ago or 2 weeks ago, something. Yeah. Have people jumped in to start contributing? Where are we on that?
Not yet. I have people who say they want to contribute, so my next step is setting up a Zoom meeting and jump on calls and start talking to them because
if you want to contribute,
Yes, I stuck a form in the README and the initial thread. So if you fill that in, I'm going to start doing kind of group Zoom calls.
All right. So back to the tour. You've
Oh,
got
good. Okay,
database of-
so you had the functions table.
Yep.
And then one of the things, people who've been following me know that I'm into graphs, but I think graphs are a fantastic way to represent code.
Uh-huh.
So just even zooming in,
Yep.
just being able to see how different functions are reliant on each other. I think a really easy way to understand code. And again, this is more for demo purposes. The real user here is Baby AGI to be able to we'll call a function and say what functions depend on it. If I need to edit a function, how do I make sure that none of the other functions using it will break? We'll just ask, just go through the graph and pull all the other functions that use it, and you can edit all of them at once. And just to show you the graph, right, I can go through same features as whatnot. I can also test each function here.
Yeah,
and then one of the views I'll show you, which is not this is, I think, Cytoscape, but the mermaid graph is actually easier to read. And I'll show this to you as I add a couple more functions, but
Very cool.
you can kind of see, generate missing embeddings. We'll use embed function description, which uses embed
This is
input,
the dependency graph.
which uses light LLM. So this is auto-generated.
Oh, cool.
And what's great is as I create and add more functions, we'll come back here and we'll see this graph automatically grow. And the 3D graph is just for fun. I think there'll be some fun stuff to do in here. There's a logs page, so you can see all the logs. So we recently ran GPT call. We recently ran embed input. So if you click through,
cool.
you can see
saw
those
that. The
logs.
cat.
Yep. They are bundled, which I'll show. Come back to it later after we show a couple of stuff. But
Cool.
as I said, function added or updated triggers AI description generator. So if I click through to the log, I'll see these kind of bundled on one page. And then there's a chat feature which allows me to dynamically load functions as tools into the chat. Again, this is more of demo purpose, but you can see how it works. And I can say, what services do you have API key stored for? And it'll use that function from the database as a tool in as a tool.
Let's give it a task.
So let me jump in and let's add a couple of like API keys and some plugins. So the function I gave it a couple baked in plugins. So I'm gonna give it Firecrawl and SERP API, which
Why
gives
would
me
not you just give it all the base functions to go and just be like, a fully formed baby in the wild. Let's go. And then-
we'll get there.
Okay.
We'll get there. But right now I'm
But is there a practical reason, just like efficiency or?
For now, eventually what I need to do more, some places I'm being lazy and where I should do like a find similar function and pull a subset of function, I'm actually pulling all the functions. If I just load too many functions in there, that part breaks. So until I fix that,
Okay.
it's easier to test on a smaller scale. So I just gave it Firecrawl, SERP API. So I'm slowly kind of giving it. Also, I didn't want it to be too opinionated. So a lot of these plugins are optional.
Yeah.
I think I need to build like a pack loading UI to make this.
I get the sense actually listening to you and following your projects that the way you craft innovation is by constraints. And I think you mentioned this the other day when we were talking about you purposely built this using like GPT-3 or 3.5.
Yes.
Not like Sonnet.
Well, I was building with Sonnet, but yes, within the functions to get the framework
When
working.
you're running with 3.5.
I was using 3.5 Turbo.
You're purposely handicapping the intelligence of your system because that artificial constraint helps you build a better system.
Yes.
Is that the idea?
Well, my thinking is if I can get it working on 3.5 Turbo, then it'll do much better with 4.0 or any of the better models. But if I'm reliant on 4.0 or if I build a tool that's reliant on 0.1 preview, it's going to take me a lot of work to get it work locally.
Virtually 100% of the startups I talk to, if you really dig on open models and fine tuning and this and that, they'll just say, "Oh, we just use the smartest model. We just use GPT-4 for everything. Why bother optimizing?" Even companies that have quite some scale. But I don't think that's in conflict with what you're saying.
No, I don't think it is.
When I'm developing, constrain it and I'll build something stronger. It's like, it's interesting.
And it's kind of also for me, like it makes building more fun because I can get something working and be like, okay, I think I'm ready to try 4 and I'll try it.
Yeah.
And most of the time I'm like, wow,
Delighted.
it works so much better than during the test and it's a very delightful experience. And then in my own mind, I was a big Dragon Ball guy, but in Dragon Ball, they would train without being a Super Saiyan and then they would fight as a Super Saiyan, which was actually more effective than training as a Super Saiyan. So that's what Baby AGI is doing in my mind.
Okay. It's like running with a weight vest on.
Exactly.
Training with a weight vest. Question, did you, when you were building this, I think 4.0 came out. 4.0 preview.
Yes, I think so.
What was that like for you when you plugged that in, or have you tried it yet?
I did try it. Actually, there were some functions that didn't work as well on 4.0 preview,
Oh, interesting.
which was surprising.
Why? It's like overthinking it, or
Yeah, I was overthinking it. I think with 3.5, when I asked it for JSON, it was actually just spitting out JSON. And then when I switched to 4.0, it started adding the triple quotes. And this was last night that I was testing. And I was like, oh, that's fixable. But I was like, I'm not going to do this late at night right before my demo.
That stuff is such a pain.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So what I just did was I gave it my firewall API key, SERP API key. I loaded 2 of the default baked-in plugins that I've loaded up into the framework, and then I have a couple of draft functions. They're kind of in a drafts folder that I've prepared that I can show you. It'll try to generate its own functions.
Okay.
And I think I loaded those up. So if I go back here, we'll see some new functions here.
Oh wow.
That I just loaded up with those packs. And going back to the mermaid graph, which will make it really easy to kind of, which is a great way to see it. So the generate function from description right here, we'll use fetch function codes because it needs it'll use it to decide which functions are helpful in building a new function. So a lot of the whole reason to put it in a database was so a Baby AGI could pull relevant functions as context.
Okay.
There's handle API documentation, which uses SERP API scrape, so you can kind of see the flow here. Generate final function code. But let's just run it because it's more fun. Generate function from description. Now, if I can cheat and give myself a really easy one.
Oh, funny. So you can use the UI to kickstart it if you start with the right function.
Exactly.
I was figuring, I didn't know what the starting
Yeah.
point
So,
was.
I mean, I think there's a lot that can be done in the README on how to use it. But just the generate function from description, I loaded from
Are you
one of the...
saying I don't read readmes?
No, the README is not written well. I'm actually hoping that I'll just send this video to someone and have them write documentation based on this video.
Someone might be Gemini.
I'm going to just use an easy one because I tested this, and I'm just going to use one of the free APIs that doesn't require an API key. Use cat ninja, API to get a cat fact. So I just did that.
Wait, Cat Ninja API to get a cat. Oh, Cat Ninja API is an API about cats.
Yeah, so it's a free API with no auth that I found, and I was using it as a test, and I thought, let's start with something easy.
Okay.
But so I just did generate function from description, and we'll show you how the...
Now, is it literally going to be figuring out from the web what is that API and how do I use it?
So what you see is generate function from description. It started, and what's cool is the yellow light is it's in flight. Green means it's done. So first it's fetched existing functions. I mean, so for this, right, like I'm watching it generate, I can tell you it's fetching existing functions.
Why not use an observability? Are there observability open source tools that, if I wanted to build observability, of course there are products.
Yes.
I know some of them.
Yes.
And then there are
Asian Tops, Brain Trust. I mean, there's good. Yeah,
of course. Layton Smith has that built in, and Weights and Biases has that.
Yeah.
Okay, so is part of your strategy also like, hey, I'm going to open source this, so it should all be open?
I mean, for me, I just want to share my ideas because here's what I want. I'm going to keep building it because it's fun.
Yeah.
But if someone shows me a tool that's a better version of what I built, like I'm happy to switch over to it.
Okay.
Fetch existing functions, which is going to use, it's going to do analyze internal functions. This one's fun. I'll show you the output of this one. It'll tell you it's finding reference functions, which is functions that it thinks will be helpful as references when writing it as context, and then reusable functions. In this case, it doesn't need a reusable function, but if it decided, hey, I should use GPT call, it'll show up here.
Yeah, cool.
And then what it's doing is using get function wrapper to pull all the code, and it's going to use it in the prompt as context. And then it went to determine external APIs.
Cool.
And so handle API documentation started with a SERP API search. So it did a SERP API, looked for Cat Ninja API.
Nice.
It then scraped the website about API Ninja about cats. Here, let's just do after it scraped the website, it generated a final function code, and then it added the function to the database. So get cat fact. It automatically wrote a description. It's pretty long
actually
description.
made a first-class function for that API.
Yes,
Okay,
so it's a function right here, and it should not have added the decorator, so I know I'm going to have to delete this part.
Oh, that's cool.
But and
Wait, okay.
it added a decorator, which is just I need to prompt it out because it should be storing all this data directly in the database. The decorator is for when you're running it from the code.
Got it.
And for some reason, it's saying I need an API key, which it should not have.
So it needs more context about where it's running, actually.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
And it's saying it needs an API key, so my guess is it's not going to work.
But all these things that you're talking through out loud, that should really be already have been in context to avoid the problem.
Yes.
But then there also be a way for you to provide literally this human language level feedback
Yes.
to your machine to fix it.
Ideally, I can say, hey, dude, do this went wrong, fix it next time.
Someone out there could build that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it did a good job. It actually doesn't need an API key, and I don't have a good UI to tell it that it doesn't need to. But just looking at it, if aside from the API key, this should have worked.
Okay. And it had worked. It would have returned a little string of a cat
of a cat function
randomly. Yep. Okay.
So that's the generate function, and then so I was able to show you the log of how that ran. Yeah, and for me right now, the stage I'm at, right, is actually I'm trying different ways to have it write code. So I have multiple code writing functions, and I'm kind of testing them and see which one works better. And this framework helps me do that really well.
Sure.
So let's go to now choose or create function, which is what I call my level 2 agent. So I talked about self-building agents so the first one, the demo I just showed you was I asked it to create a function and it created a function. What I want actually is as it's figuring out what it needs to do, it just should dynamically build those functions for itself.
Well, you shared a graphic that I think you made was like level 0 through 3.
Oh, yeah, I could go to that.
Yeah, show that.
And again, this is more for sharing ideas, but the 3 levels of what I call self-building agent. Level 0 is most tools, which is there's a function library that the AI has access to. When a user sends a query, the AI will pick a function, use it to answer the query. Your agent only uses human crafted tools, right? Yeah. That's level. There's no self-build there.
To be fair, outside of level 1, when the models aren't good, they veer off to the point where you're not going to get useful results most of the time if you're doing anything.
And I think a helpful context is that I don't have to, like, as a VC by day, I don't have to monetize Baby AGI. So I get to focus on building what's something that I think...
This is pure experimentation and innovation. This is in the lab. We're in the lab here.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not...
If you're trying to build something reliable, this is not what you're trying to do yet.
No. Failure is good. This is how we push the frontiers.
Level 1 is what I call request-based, which is what I just showed you. I can request to have a function created. Now it's in the function library. So if I ask it to get a cat fact, it could use that function that I asked it to create. What I called level 2 is need-based. So if a user sends a query to the AI, the AI checks if a function exists to answer that. If yes, it'll just use that. If no, it'll generate a function and then use that, which is not that far from the last step, except that no longer do I have to think ahead of time what it needs.
Sure.
But I can just I should be able to just say hey, I need you to go grab stuff from my Airtable. It'll try it. It'll say, hey, I actually need your API key and the base number. I give it to it, and then it just does it. Level 3 is what I called anticipatory, and I do have a demo of this, which again doesn't write the best code, but it works. Which is if I give it a user description. Based on that user description, it'll generate X number of synthetic queries that the user is likely to ask an AI agent. And then it'll send it into that level 2 system. And if it doesn't have a function for it, it'll generate new functions. So when I send in become a growth marketer, and I just set a high number of 20 queries, and I come back, an hour later, there'll be a whole bunch of functions that a growth marketer might you ask an agent to do.
Okay. Cool.
And the idea of even doing it ahead of time is that then you can test it, you can improve on it before it's actually needed. So that's the levels of agents. And so the next one I'll show you is choose or create a function. So let's try post message to Slack saying hi.
And just for context, do you have a Slack function anywhere in your database?
I do not have a Slack function anywhere.
So it has no idea what to do.
So what it's going to do, it's going to
decide to create
it's going to kick it off to the original earlier generate a function. So it's going to go through all that. It's going SERP API search is going to look for Slack message posting API documentation Python. So it's starting to look for that. Again,
and this is already where I went through a minute ago this agent frameworks. To my knowledge, none of them could do this or even try.
I mean, this one, this one can't do it, but it can try.
They can try it sometimes. We're getting there.
It sometimes does.
You're trying. This is the central. It's very dynamic,
and that's what I wanted to get to. Right? Is I can just say post a message to Slack saying hi. What it did was it looked for existing functions. It looked for functions that might be useful. It's actually trying to generate the function code, and what it'll try to do, and I think this part always fails, is it'll actually try to use it. Well, I actually added the function. We'll see. What did it say? Error generating parameter. So it errored out on the actual using of the function. Well, I didn't expect anything to actually work, but I'm still going to show you some cool stuff. So I mean, really it posts, it built a function to post a message to Slack. Again, I need to prompt out this adding a decorator because, right? I asked her to post a message to Slack. It realized it didn't have that function, so it dynamically generated that function and has created a function and store in the database. I mean, right now this is all back end, but I actually think you can do something similar to the front end where you can kind of dynamically store widgets that can use functions in the back end.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you have like both front end and back end like being dynamically generated and creating and like updating
very
itself.
Interested in that. I mean, I think the whole ephemeral nature of like the artifacts is great for one-time use. You know, it's cool, but like as I'm building a complex app, I'd actually like to tap that ability right within the framework I'm in.
Yeah.
And if something works, store and let my users to some extent do that as well.
Yep. And this whole framework itself, right? Even the execute function, all of these are actually using functions from the database. So when I use this chat and I load a tool on it, it's actually using the chat with functions function that's actually in the database itself. So this whole the front end framework is actually a demo of how to use the back end framework.
Yeah, cool. I know there seems to be a world where a lot more people are creating ephemeral apps and services and deploying them to cloud, and then simply having a system that's able to build by composing those systems together might be the way forward.
Yeah, actually some ideas I've heard, which I think make sense, is one is like there's existing libraries of LangChain tools, Crew AI tools. Yeah. So let's be able to just like dynamically pull that in. Yeah. Which isn't that hard. I have a kind of I'm testing a Open API spec to function converter. Yeah. So if I give it a Open API spec, it'll take that and it'll generate and save functions. So I think if you create some of those, it should be easy to kind of build out the original library. Yeah, yeah. And then one of the things you saw here is it's pulling in existing functions as context. So actually, the better functions exist in the database, the better functions it can write. If that makes sense.
It has, because it's using them.
Because it's doing a k-shot on like, here's a couple of reference functions, and now let's create a new function. So I'm noticing that it's starting to scrape websites 6 or 7 times, and that usually tells me that's when I press stop on Replit. Because I'm going to guess it's actually looping through something it's not supposed to.
Okay, where does this vision go? Like, what is the unlock that you think this leads to?
I think we will all have, right? We're coming to a world where if you want a tool, you can ask it and it'll generate an artifact and throw it away for you. Yeah. But if we live in a future where me and you are going to generate thousands of tools and have AI build it, don't we want all 1,000 of these tools to be reusable, to use each other, and for the 1,000th one function to be much better because of the past 1,000 tools you've built?
Okay, got it.
And how do we get to that future is we need to give AI the ability to store and reuse these functions.
Sure. And the system has to be cognizant of its goal, which is to maintain and make that better and compete against each other. And you think that because of that, you will achieve a next level of productivity on all these tools you're building, for one.
Yes.
Less work and maintenance. Will there be some fundamental capability of the tool that emerges, you think?
I mean, hopefully, I would want an AI to not, like, I shouldn't need to tell it which tools to use. Like, if there's multiple tools, better
ideas than you thought.
Yeah, like ideally, it's doing what I do, which is like, hey, go, I want to transcribe this video. Go look at reviews on recent models that have come out. Pick one, like, build yourself a tool to start using it. Test it against the previous one. To go take it back to the first Baby AGI, was a loop between 3 essential parts, which was the planning, execution, and essentially memory of some sort. Yeah. And so planning is essentially reasoning capability, and we know that the models are great at it, and it's only going to get better. So I feel like reasoning is actually not a problem for us. We can just assume that's going to get better. Yeah. And then the next big thing we need is execution, which is all the tools which people are hand building, but the tools I use are constantly changing. As we said, there's probably better tools out there I don't know about. Yeah. So having it be able to build its own tools, I think, is a really, really important part of making autonomous agents work. And then to make that work, it needs to have a good memory of tools it's used, tools it's built, things it's tried to do before. Yeah. And so the memory is kind of the auto logging and also storing all the functions in a database, right? If you think about artifacts right now, I don't know if artifacts or canvases, are they embedding and storing somewhere? I'm not sure. But if every artifact if every artifact or canvas was a reusable function that was stored that it could dynamically call efficiently, obviously these chat systems be much more powerful. Yeah. And something we talked about earlier is I think this is a trend that we'll see more of. I think Brain Trust mentioned they announced something called functions last week, which is kind of a similar idea of being able to kind of build functions as code that you can dynamically load into an agent. Gumloop I also saw that you can start building your own nodes, which is essentially functions stored as nodes. very similar to this tool. You define input parameters, output parameters, which allow you to map functions with nodes with each other.
Sure.
So this is the direction I think we're
probably be a marketplace for these things.
Yeah. Oh, eventually, I think we should have a shared library of functions. Like if you get Airtable working, why should my agent have to figure it out?
Yeah, of course.
And then I've seen some Web3 versions. I don't know exactly what Sahara Labs is doing, but I can imagine a Web3 network of functions that work. New versions of Open API I've seen as well. People trying to build like a standard for AI tools.
What do you feel are the use cases that are really getting the most traction right now? Semi-autonomous, if not autonomous.
I mean, the first one we got that was actually useful for myself and for everyone else was research.
Yeah.
The public information, figuring out how to use Google, figuring out how to scrape. Like between those two, there's so much that's already helpful.
Yeah. What about in terms of the automation side? Like, actually
taking actions. I feel like customer service is where it's happening the most. Like updating,
taking action,
yeah,
changing the cart,
changing the cart, refunding, like sending, like that seems like a reasonable reason to request a refund. We'll send you a shipping label. I think what we're seeing today from startups is the people who are handcrafting good, valuable agents are able to make money today. What I go back and forth on is I don't want to hand code every common workflow. But I know like if it works, I want it to be hard coded. So what I think I eventually want is for my agent to dynamically test different workflows. But once it finds one that works, I want it to hard code that into a function.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how that's going to work, but like in my mind, that's how I imagine these things working. Where it'll say, "Hey, we tried 7 different ways. We found one that works. We've now hard coded an agent. Next time you ask, we'll just use that hard coded function for you."
The one-shot multi-step stuff breaks a lot because it gets off track.
Yeah.
Well, great. Spin up, a competition and figure out which didn't break. And then once you know it didn't break, you can store that in a table system like this and reuse it.
Exactly. Like if a new model comes out, why can't I just say, "Hey, new model came out. Can you just run through all our functions and see which ones will work better with this new model?"
Yeah.
And I want my system to figure it out on its own.
Yeah.
Again, it's easy to say, harder to build, but that's the vision.
There isn't much to cobble together.
Yeah.
You, Neon, and E2B, and you could build what you just described in 3 more weekends and start to run it. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time. This is a great conversation and exploration. Love to see where it's going.
Oh, can I make a little plug?
Yeah,
for anyone interested in agents? Obviously, if you're interested in building with me, please fill out the form. In that form, I do have a couple questions saying like, "Oh, do you invest in startups? Do you invest in venture funds?" I am working with some friends. We're going to be launching an agent fund soon. I don't think it's like really publicly announced. I've like hinted at it, but it will be an AngelList rolling fund dedicated to investing in the autonomous agent industry.
Nice.
So it's going to be smaller checks across the whole space. It'll be a public fundraise because it's an AngelList rolling fund, which is why I can talk about it here. Yeah. So if, for people interested in that, that'll be coming soon.
I'll look forward to that. All right. Thanks, Yohei.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.